At midnight, a phone rings, and someone vanishes. Welcome to the Silent Clueworks. I am your host, Echo of Silence. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Voices matter. Let's enter Nero Wolfe and the Phantom Call at midnight. I was reading a book that would have made its author weep if he knew I was halfway through and still couldn't tell the butler from the murderer when the phone rang at 11:53. That's close enough to midnight to count, and midnight calls to Nero Wolfe's brownstone on West 35th Street fall into two categories: wrong numbers and disasters. We don't get many wrong numbers. I let it ring twice while I marked my place and considered my options. Wolfe was upstairs in his bedroom, probably dreaming about orchids or the proper way to prepare sweetbreads, and waking him for anything short of the building being on fire would result in my being fired. On the other hand, letting the phone ring until it gave up might mean missing something interesting, and interesting things had been in short supply lately. I picked up the receiver on the fourth ring and gave it the standard greeting. Nero Wolfe's residence, Archie Goodwin speaking. There was a pause, the kind that means someone is deciding whether they've made a terrible mistake. Then a man's voice, carefully controlled but with an edge that suggested the control was costing him effort. Mr. Goodwin, good. I was hoping you would answer. Most people are. It's one of my better qualities. What can I do for you? You can tell Mr. Wolfe that someone knows about the Barstow case. That got my attention. The Barstow case had been closed for 3 years, and it had been the kind of case that left everyone involved grateful for the silence that followed. I sat up straighter in my chair. Mister, I don't know who you are, but if you're trying to impress me with inside information, you'll need to do better than that. Half of New York knows about the Barstow case? Not the part I know, he said. Not the part about the missing evidence that never made it to the police. Not the part about what really happened to Charles Barstow's private papers. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The missing papers had been a detail that exactly 3 people knew about: Wolfe, myself, and the client who had paid us to make sure they stayed missing. The client had been dead for 2 years. You have my attention, I said. What do you want? I want Mr. Wolfe to take a case. My case. And I want him to understand that if he refuses, certain facts about his methods might become public knowledge. That sounds like blackmail. It sounds like a business proposition. I have something he wants to keep quiet, and he has something I need. We should be able to reach an understanding. I looked toward the closed door that led to the hall and the elevator that would take me up to Wolfe's room. The idea of waking him with this news made my teeth ache, but the alternative was worse. Wolfe's reputation was built on discretion as much as detection, and someone threatening that discretion was like someone threatening his orchids or his dinner schedule. What kind of case? I asked. The kind that requires his particular talents. Someone is trying to kill me, Mr. Goodwin, and I believe they may succeed unless Mr. Wolfe intervenes. The attempts have been subtle so far, but they're escalating. Have you considered the police? He laughed, a sound like paper tearing. The police would want to know why someone wants me dead. That would require explanations I'm not prepared to give. Mr. Wolfe, on the other hand, specializes in solutions that don't require awkward questions. When do you want to see him? Tomorrow, this afternoon. 3 o'clock would be convenient. It might be convenient for you, but Wolfe sees clients when he chooses to see them, not when they choose to be seen. I'll ask him if he's interested. He'll be interested, the man said with certainty that I didn't like. When he hears what I know about the Barstow papers, he'll be very interested indeed. You keep mentioning these papers like they're your ace in the hole. What makes you think they matter to him now? Because 3 years ago, Mr. Wolfe made those papers disappear to protect his client's reputation. What he didn't know was that I had copies. What he also didn't know was that destroying those papers was itself a crime, one that could cost him his license and his freedom if the right people learned about it. The cold feeling in my stomach spread upward. I knew Wolfe had bent rules before, but this sounded like more than bending. You're saying he committed a crime? I'm saying he made a choice between his client's welfare and strict legal procedure, and he chose his client. It was admirable in its way. It was also felonious destruction of evidence in a murder case. I was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then I said, "What's your name?" "That can wait until tomorrow. 3 o'clock, Mr. Goodwin. Don't disappoint me." The line went dead. I sat there holding the receiver until the dial tone started buzzing, then hung up and looked at the clock. It was 4 minutes past midnight, which meant it was technically Thursday morning, which meant Wolfe would be coming down from the plant rooms at 11 and expecting his morning routine to proceed without interruption. I was going to have to interrupt it anyway. I turned off the office lights and headed for the stairs, already composing the speech I would need to wake Wolfe and explain why someone's midnight phone call was about to turn our quiet week into something considerably more complicated. The house felt different as I climbed the stairs, as if the phone call had changed the air pressure. Someone had reached into our world with a threat and a demand, and Wolfe was going to hate that almost as much as he was going to hate being woken up to hear about it. But he was going to hear about it because whoever had called knew too much and wanted too much. And that combination had a way of leading to the kind of trouble that didn't go away by itself. I stood outside Wolfe's bedroom door for a full minute, weighing my options. Experience had taught me that waking Nero Wolfe from sleep was like poking a hibernating bear with a sharp stick, except bears are generally more reasonable when disturbed. But the alternative was letting him sleep through a threat that could destroy everything he had built, and that seemed like the kind of career-ending mistake that would make unemployment look attractive. I knocked twice, firmly but not aggressively, the way you might knock on the door of a house where you suspect the occupant owns both a shotgun and a short temper. Silence stretched for 30 seconds. Then came a sound like a whale surfacing in shallow water, followed by Wolfe's voice, thick with sleep and the kind of irritation that could curdle fresh cream. "Archie, this interruption had better justify the continuation of your employment." "It does," I said through the door. "We have a problem that couldn't wait for your morning routine." More silence, punctuated by the protest of bed springs supporting 1/7 of a ton of detective shifting position. When Wolfe spoke again, the sleep was gone from his voice, replaced by the sharp attention he reserved for genuine crises. "Enter." I opened the door to find him sitting up in bed, his yellow silk pajamas making him look like an enormous, disgruntled canary. His eyes were fully open now, and they fixed on me with the intensity of a jeweler examining a suspicious diamond. "Someone called 20 minutes ago," I began, keeping my voice level. "He wants to hire you, but he's using blackmail as his opening argument. He claims to have copies of documents from the Barstow case, and he says what you did with the originals could cost you your license." The change in Wolfe's expression was subtle but unmistakable. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his fingers, which had been drumming impatiently on the coverlet, went still. For Wolfe, that was the equivalent of jumping up and pacing the room. "The Barstow papers," he said. It wasn't a question. That's what he implied. He knew enough details to make it convincing. Timing, nature of the documents, the fact that they were personal correspondence rather than physical evidence. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, and I could practically see him reviewing the case in his mind, examining every decision, every action, every possible vulnerability. When he opened them again, his gaze was cold enough to freeze whiskey. "What does this anonymous historian want?" "Protection. He claims someone is trying to kill him, and the attempts are getting less subtle. He wants you to find out who and stop them. And if I decline, he takes his historical collection to the district attorney's office." Wolfe's grunt conveyed more disgust than most people could manage with a full paragraph. Blackmail is the weapon of the incompetent and the desperate. Did he provide specifics about these alleged attempts on his life? only that they've been subtle so far but are escalating. He's scared, genuinely scared. The blackmail feels like leverage he's using because he doesn't think you'd take the case otherwise. When does he wish to present himself? 3 o'clock this afternoon. Wolfe leaned back against his pillows, his fingers resuming their drumming. This time, it wasn't impatience. It was the rhythm he used when his brain was working through a problem at high speed. The Barstow matter was concluded satisfactorily 3 years ago, he said finally. Charles Barstow was murdered by his business partner, who needed him dead before a substantial embezzlement was discovered. The papers Barstow had collected were private correspondence documenting the moral and financial failures of various prominent citizens. They were irrelevant to the murder, but would have destroyed reputations and lives if made public. Their destruction was morally justified. The law might call it obstruction of justice, I pointed out, especially if someone can prove you knew they were evidence in a criminal case. They were not evidence of the murder, Wolfe said sharply. They were evidence of human weakness and stupidity, which, while regrettable, is not generally criminal. Try explaining that to a prosecutor looking for headlines. Wolfe's expression darkened further. If this man truly possesses copies of those documents, he has had them for 3 years. Why emerge now? What has changed? That was the question that had been nagging at me since I hung up the phone. Maybe he didn't know what they were worth until recently. Maybe something happened that made him desperate enough to use his leverage. Or perhaps, Wolfe said slowly, someone else has discovered his possession of them and is attempting to eliminate him before he can use them. That possibility sent a chill down my spine. If someone was killing to keep the Barstow secrets buried, then our anonymous caller might be telling the truth about the attempts on his life. So we take the case? I asked. We will receive this man at 3 o'clock, Wolfe corrected. Whether we accept his employment depends on the veracity of his claims and the legitimacy of his need. And the blackmail angle. Wolfe's smile was thin and cold. No one coerces me, Archie. If this man requires assistance and possesses genuine information, we may reach an accommodation that serves both our interests. If he is merely a blackmailer trading on fabricated threats, he will discover that I am not easily intimidated. I nodded, knowing that tone. Wolfe had made his decision, and it wasn't surrender. What do you want me to do between now and then? Sleep, Wolfe said curtly. In the morning, you will contact Inspector Kramer. Discreetly inquire whether any rumors regarding irregularities in our handling of the Barstow case have reached his ears. Do not mention tonight's call or our visitor's identity, which we do not yet know. Simply gauge whether the waters have been disturbed. And if they have, then our caller is not merely desperate. He is already at work spreading his poison. That will inform my approach to this afternoon's conversation. Wolfe shifted in the bed, preparing to settle back into sleep. You will also telephone Saul Panzer after 8 o'clock. Have him available for surveillance or investigation if this matter proves more complex than a simple case of domestic discord. Saul's going to love being dragged into another one of our messes. Saul appreciates steady employment, Wolfe replied. As should you. This intrusion may prove profitable, assuming we can neutralize the threat it represents. I headed for the door, then paused. One more thing. This guy chose to call at midnight. That suggests either a flair for drama or genuine urgency. Indeed, Wolfe said, his eyes already closing. We shall discover which when he presents himself. Until then, I suggest you rest. Tomorrow may prove demanding. I left him settling back into his pillows and made my way downstairs, my mind already working through the implications. Someone had reached into our world with a threat and a demand, someone who knew enough about our past to cause real damage. Whether he was a genuine victim or a clever opportunist remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. The quiet week I'd been enjoying was officially over. The house felt different as I turned off the office lights and headed for my room. The midnight call had changed something fundamental, like a stone thrown into still water. The ripples were spreading, and by 3 o'clock tomorrow, we would know whether we were dealing with a simple case of domestic murder or something far more dangerous. I fell asleep wondering which it would be, and whether our anonymous caller would live long enough for us to find out. Morning came with the kind of grey October light that makes you wonder if the sun has given up trying. I was downstairs by 8, nursing coffee that Fritz had made strong enough to wake the dead, when he emerged from the kitchen wearing the expression he reserved for days when the natural order had been disturbed. "Mr. Wolfe was restless in the night," he announced, making it sound like a personal failing on my part. "Guilty as charged. We had a midnight visitor of the telephone variety who may be planning to complicate our lives." Fritz's eyebrows performed a small ballet of concern. "Complications before breakfast are the worst kind. Will there be additional guests for lunch?" "Possibly. Better plan for 3 and make it something that won't suffer if the conversation gets heated." "Squab with herbs," Fritz decided. "Substantial but not heavy. It will survive any amount of unpleasantness." I finished my coffee and headed for the office to make the calls Wolfe had requested. Inspector Kramer answered his phone with the enthusiasm of a man discovering his coffee had been replaced with cold tea. Kramer: "Good morning, Inspector. This is Archie Goodwin, calling to brighten your day with friendly conversation and mutual cooperation." Goodwin: "It's 8:30 in the morning. What disaster are you about to dump on my desk?" "No disasters. Just curiosity. I wanted to ask if you've heard any recent chatter about the Barstow case." The pause that followed was long enough for me to count 3 heartbeats. "Barstow? That case has been closed for 3 years. What kind of chatter?" "The kind that suggests someone might be taking a fresh interest in the details. Anyone asking questions, requesting files, that sort of thing." "Not through official channels," Kramer said slowly. "Should someone be asking questions? Just checking whether any old ghosts have started rattling their chains. You haven't heard anything from the DA's office? No reporters sniffing around?" "Nothing. And if I do, I'll want to know why Nero Wolfe is suddenly interested in ancient history." "Thanks, Inspector. That's all I needed to know." "Goodwin, if you're about to stir up something that's going to land on my desk as a crisis, I want advance warning." "You'll be among the first to know," I promised, and hung up before he could demand to be the first. Kramer's ignorance was reassuring. If our midnight caller had been spreading his poison, it hadn't reached official ears yet. That gave us some breathing room. Assuming he lived long enough to keep his appointment, I dialed Saul Panzer next. Saul answered as if he'd been sitting by the phone waiting for my call, which, knowing Saul, he probably had been. "Panzer." "Saul, it's Archie. We may need you this afternoon. Surveillance, background work, possibly more complicated things if the situation develops that way." "What kind of situation?" "The kind where someone claims to have leverage on Wolfe and also claims someone is trying to kill him for it. Wolfe wants you available in case we need to move fast." "I'll be ready. Where do you want me?" "Outside the brownstone from 2:30 on. Our visitor is supposed to arrive at 3. If he leaves in a hurry or if anyone else shows unusual interest in him, stick close. Consider it done. Anything else I should know?" "Yeah, be careful. If this guy is telling the truth about the attempts on his life, whoever's after him might be watching." I spent the rest of the morning handling correspondence and trying not to think about what our 3 o'clock appointment might bring. Wolfe came down from the plant rooms at 11 precisely, looking fresh and untroubled, which usually meant he was deeply concerned about something. He settled behind his desk, rang for beer, and began sorting through the mail with the concentration of a surgeon examining X-rays. "Did you speak with Mr. Kramer?" he asked, without looking up. "I did. He hasn't heard any rumors, and nobody's been asking questions about Barstow through official channels. Our caller either hasn't made his move yet, or he's keeping it unofficial." "Or he is dead," Wolfe observed, opening a bottle of beer with the reverence of a priest handling communion wine, which would resolve our immediate problem while confirming the legitimacy of his concerns. Always the optimist. Saul will be watching the street from 2:30. Wolfe nodded and returned to his mail. I knew better than to interrupt when he was in this mood. He was preparing himself for the confrontation, organizing his thoughts like a general positioning troops before battle. Lunch was the promised squab, and it was excellent. We ate in the dining room with minimal conversation, Wolfe's way of maintaining calm before a storm. By 2:30, I was positioned near the office window, watching the street through sheer curtains. Saul was out there somewhere, invisible as always. At 2:58, a taxi pulled up to the curb. The man who got out was medium height, early 40s, with dark hair going gray and the kind of nervous energy that comes from looking over your shoulder too often. He wore a good suit that hung on him as if he'd lost weight recently, and he carried a leather briefcase like it contained the crown jewels. "He's here," I said. Wolfe didn't look up from his book. "Describe him." "Nervous, well-dressed, looks like he hasn't been sleeping well, carrying a briefcase that probably holds our future happiness or misery." "Show him in." I opened the front door before he could ring the bell. He jumped slightly, then composed himself and stepped into the hall. "Mr. Goodwin?" "That's right, you're punctual. Come in." I led him to the office, where he stopped in the doorway and took in the room with the quick, assessing glance of someone who had learned to evaluate exits and escape routes. When his eyes settled on Wolfe behind the desk, they stayed there. "Good afternoon," Wolfe said without rising. "You have a name, I presume?" The man swallowed once before answering. "Martin Kessler. I'm the one who called last night." "Mr. Kessler, please sit." Wolfe gestured to the red leather chair. "You claim to possess copies of documents from the Barstow case, and you suggested that someone wishes to kill you. Elaborate." Kessler sat on the edge of the chair, clutching his briefcase. 3 years ago, shortly after Charles Barstow's death, I received an anonymous package at my law office. It contained photocopies of personal papers that had belonged to Barstow. Letters, memoranda, financial records. Many of them documented illegal or unethical activities by various prominent individuals. "Yes," Wolfe said, "I am familiar with their general content." I learned later, through careful research, that the original documents had been removed from Barstow's safe before the police could examine them. The person responsible was, according to my sources, you. Wolfe inclined his head slightly. "Continue." "For 3 years I kept the copies secure, unsure what to do with them. 2 weeks ago, that changed. I received a note at my apartment. No signature, no return address. It said, 'I know what you have. Time to discuss terms.' The phrasing suggests collaboration rather than theft," Wolfe observed. "Your correspondent wished to employ you as a partner." That's what I thought. I ignored the note. 3 days later, someone cut the brake lines on my car. I discovered it before driving, fortunately. The next day, I found my apartment door unlocked when I came home. Nothing was missing, but things had been moved, searched. "Did you report these incidents?" Kessler's laugh was bitter. "To tell them what? That someone was threatening me because I'd been sitting on stolen evidence for 3 years? I'd be the one arrested." "So instead you decided to threaten me," Wolfe said mildly. "I decided to come to someone who would understand the situation. You made a choice 3 years ago to protect your client by destroying those papers. I made a choice to keep copies because I didn't trust that all the secrets they contained deserved burial. Now someone knows I have them, and they're willing to kill to either get them or silence me. You still haven't explained how you learned of my involvement." Kessler hesitated, then reached into his briefcase and withdrew a single sheet of paper. "This was included with the photocopies. It's a carbon copy of a letter Barstow's secretary sent to you, asking you to take the case. It mentions the papers specifically and suggests their sensitivity." Wolfe's eyes sharpened as he examined the letter. "This is authentic?" "I had the handwriting verified." It's genuine. That's how I knew you were involved, and that's how I knew you'd want to keep it quiet." Wolfe set the letter on his desk and leaned back in his chair. "You have behaved foolishly and offensively, Mr. Kessler. However, your predicament appears genuine. I will undertake to discover who is menacing you and why. In return, you will place those documents entirely under my control." "I can't give you all of them," Kessler said quickly. "They're my only protection." "They are currently attracting assassins," Wolfe pointed out. "If you wish to survive, you must remove the target from your back. You will give me the copies you have with you. The originals, wherever they are hidden, will remain your insurance until this matter is resolved." Kessler thought about it, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. Finally, he nodded and withdrew a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. He placed it on Wolfe's desk with obvious reluctance. "There's something else," he said. "Yesterday I received another note. This one was different. It gave me an address and a time. Tonight, 9 o'clock. It said if I didn't come alone, the police would receive an interesting package about certain missing evidence." Wolfe's fingers drummed once on the arm of his chair. "Where is this meeting to take place?" "A warehouse in Queens. Industrial district, mostly abandoned at night." "You will not attend," Wolfe said firmly. "Archie will go in your place." "But they're expecting me. If I don't show up, if you do show up, you will likely be killed," Wolfe interrupted. "Archie will observe from a distance and identify your correspondent. That information will guide our next steps." I looked at the address Kessler handed me and felt a familiar tightness in my stomach. Abandoned warehouses at night were not my favorite venues for social gatherings, but they came with the territory. "One more thing," Wolfe said to Kessler. "You will remain here tonight as my guest. If someone is watching you, your absence from your usual haunts may provoke them into revealing themselves." Kessler nodded, looking relieved to have the burden of decision lifted from his shoulders. As I prepared to call Saul and arrange for the evening's entertainment, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something more complex than a simple case of blackmail and murder. The Barstow papers had been buried for 3 years. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to dig them up again, and I doubted it was just for money. The game was starting, and the stakes were higher than anyone was admitting yet. After Kessler was settled in the south room with instructions not to answer the phone or go near the windows, I spent the afternoon going through the documents he had brought. They were as unpleasant as advertised. Charles Barstow had been a collector of human weakness, documenting affairs, embezzlements, tax frauds, and assorted moral failures with the thoroughness of a prosecuting attorney building a case. What made them particularly nasty was that Barstow had apparently used them for leverage, extracting favors and concessions from people who couldn't afford exposure. Wolfe examined them with distaste, handling each page as if it might contaminate him. When he finished, he pushed them aside and reached for his beer. "Unpleasant reading," he observed. "Mr. Barstow was a man who understood the value of secrets, but not their proper use." "He was a blackmailer," I said. "A successful one, until his partner decided murder was cheaper than continued payments." "Indeed. The question now is, who among these unfortunate subjects has decided that Mr. Kessler's possession of this material represents an intolerable threat?" I had been thinking about that. Most of these people are either dead or their secrets are obsolete. A 20-year-old affair doesn't carry much punch when everyone involved is retired or deceased. "Not all secrets age gracefully," Wolfe said. "Some gain value with time, particularly in the hands of someone willing to use them strategically. Examine the documents again, Archie. Look for matters that would still carry weight today." I went through them more carefully, sorting by date and subject. 3 items stood out. The first was a series of letters documenting a judge's acceptance of bribes in a custody case. The judge was still on the bench. The second was evidence of insurance fraud by a man who now sat on the board of a major corporation. The third was a detailed account of an illegal stock manipulation scheme involving 4 partners, 3 of whom were still active in finance. "These 3, I said, spreading them on Wolfe's desk. "Any of them could be destroyed if this went public." Wolfe studied them with the concentration he usually reserved for recipes. "The judge is interesting. Judge Harold Pemberton, appointed to the appellate court 5 years ago. If his earlier corruption were exposed, it would invalidate years of rulings and create legal chaos." "That's a pretty good motive for murder," I agreed. "The insurance fraud is less dramatic, but still career-ending. The stock manipulation could result in criminal charges if the statute of limitations hasn't run." "Research the participants, Archie. I want to know their current circumstances, financial status, and any recent changes in their lives that might explain sudden desperation." I spent 2 hours on the phone and computer, calling in favors and checking public records. By 6 o'clock, I had a picture that was starting to make uncomfortable sense. "Judge Pemberton is being considered for a federal appointment," I reported. "The nomination process includes extensive background checks. If someone started digging into his past, these documents would surface." "Timing," Wolfe said with satisfaction. "The threat becomes acute because circumstances have changed. Continue." "The insurance fraud involved Gerald Hastings. He's now CEO of Hastings Financial Group. They're preparing for a public stock offering next month. Any hint of fraud in his background would torpedo the deal and cost him millions." "And the stock manipulation?" 3 of the 4 partners are still alive and active. Marcus Webb runs a hedge fund. Patricia Donovan is a venture capitalist. Simon Trace is a financial consultant to several major firms. Any one of them would be ruined if this came out, but there's something else. I paused for effect. The 4th partner, the one who died, was Charles Barstow himself. Wolfe's eyebrows rose slightly, which for him was equivalent to jumping out of his chair. Indeed. So the stock manipulation was not merely something Barstow documented, but something he participated in. Which means the other 3 partners might have known about his document collection. They might even have suspected copies existed. And when Mr. Kessler received his threatening note 2 weeks ago, one of them decided to act. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed. We now have multiple suspects with substantial motives. The question is, which one has progressed from concern to violence? Or maybe they're working together, I suggested. 3 people with the same problem might pool their resources to solve it. Possible, but unlikely. Conspiracies require trust, and people bound together by shared criminality rarely trust one another. No, I believe we are dealing with a single actor, someone who has the most to lose and the least patience for negotiation. The phone rang at 6:30. I answered it and heard Saul Panzer's voice, calm and professional as always. "Archie, I've been watching the building. About an hour ago. A man in a grey sedan parked across the street. He's been sitting there since, watching the front door. I got close enough to see he's taking photographs with a telephoto lens. Description? Early 50s, heavy build, professional demeanor. He's not trying to hide, which suggests he wants to be noticed or doesn't care if he is. Stay on him. If he moves, follow and report." I relayed the information to Wolfe, who received it with a grunt of acknowledgement. "Our adversary is establishing surveillance. He wishes to know if Mr. Kessler is still in residence or if he has sought protection elsewhere. Which means the warehouse meeting tonight might be a trap. If they're watching the building, they'll know Kessler didn't leave." "Precisely. You will attend the meeting as planned, but with precautions. Take Saul with you, and arrange for Fred Durkin to maintain observation on this building. If someone attempts entry while you are absent, I wish to know immediately." I called Fred and got him positioned outside by 7:30. At 8 o'clock I reviewed the plan with Saul, who had arrived through the back entrance to avoid our watcher. We would take separate cars to Queens, with Saul arriving first to scout the location. I would approach the warehouse at 9, making enough noise to announce my presence, but staying mobile enough to avoid becoming an easy target. At 8:15, Wolfe called me into the office where Kessler was sitting with a drink he hadn't touched. The lawyer looked worse than he had that afternoon, his face gray with stress and exhaustion. "Mr. Kessler," Wolfe began, "I require complete honesty from you now. Is there anything about your possession of these documents that you have not disclosed? Any contact with the individuals named in them? Any attempt to use the information for personal gain?" Kessler's hands tightened on his glass. "No. I kept them secure and told no one. I thought about what to do with them, but I never acted." "Why did you keep them at all?" "Because they represented truth. Ugly truth, but truth nonetheless. I thought someday there might be a use for them, a way to ensure justice was served." "Justice," Wolfe repeated with evident skepticism. "Or leverage. I'm a lawyer, Mr. Wolfe. I understand the value of information. But I never use these documents against anyone. I swear it." Wolfe studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. You will remain here tonight. Do not answer the telephone. Do not approach the windows, and do not leave this room unless Mr. Fritz Brenner or I personally escort you. Is that clear?" I left the brownstone at 8:40, driving with one eye on the rearview mirror, wondering what I would find in that warehouse and whether I would live long enough to report it. The warehouse district in Queens at night had all the charm of a morgue with worse lighting. I parked 3 blocks away and walked through shadows that seemed to have substance, checking doorways and alleys out of habit. The address Kessler had been given belonged to a 4-story brick building that looked like it had been abandoned since the Eisenhower administration. Most of its windows were broken, and graffiti covered the lower walls like hieroglyphics left by a particularly pessimistic civilization. Saul materialized beside me so quietly that I nearly reached for my gun before recognizing his lean silhouette. "Building's been empty for years," he reported in a whisper that barely disturbed the air. "2 ways in that I can see. Front door's been jimmied recently, and there's a loading dock around back. Fresh tire tracks in the alley, but no vehicle now. Anyone inside? Can't tell from out here. No lights showing, but there's something wrong about the silence. Too complete, if you know what I mean." I knew what he meant. Empty buildings have their own sounds, settling noises and wind through broken glass. This place felt dead in a way that suggested recent violence. "I'm going in the front at 9 sharp, I decided. "You circle around back and watch for anyone trying to leave in a hurry. And if I hear shooting, come fast and bring your sense of humor. We might need it." Saul disappeared into the darkness like smoke dissipating in a breeze. I gave him time to get into position, then approached the warehouse with the confidence of a man keeping an appointment and the wariness of one who suspected the appointment might be with death. The front door stood slightly ajar, steel-painted green sometime during the Truman years, and now decorated with rust like abstract art. I pushed it open with my foot, staying to one side in case someone inside had developed strong opinions about visitors. The hinges shrieked in protest, announcing my arrival to anyone within a city block. Inside, the darkness was so complete, it felt solid. I let my eyes adjust while listening for sounds of movement or breathing. The warehouse was a cavern of shadows and silence, broken only by the distant hum of traffic on the expressway. Gradually, shapes began to emerge from the gloom. Stacked crates, abandoned machinery, and in the center of the space, a pool of weak light from a single bulb hanging on a wire. Under that light sat a wooden chair. In the chair was a man, slumped forward with his head resting on his chest and his hands tied behind his back with thick rope. I moved closer, keeping to the walls and listening for any sound that might indicate I wasn't alone with the furniture. The silence stretched like a held breath. When I reached the edge of the light, I could see the man's face clearly. It was Judge Harold Pemberton, or rather, it had been Judge Pemberton. Now it was a corpse with a small, neat hole in the center of its forehead and dried blood on the front of what had once been an expensive shirt. I didn't touch anything. Experience had taught me that crime scenes were like sleeping rattlesnakes, best observed from a respectful distance. I stepped back into the shadows and pulled out my phone. "Saul," I whispered, "we have a situation. The meeting wasn't for Kessler. It was for Pemberton, and he's past caring about negotiations." "How past?" "Permanently. Single shot to the head. Professional work. This wasn't a discussion that went wrong. It was an execution." "I see movement at the back exit." Saul's voice was barely audible. "Someone leaving fast, tall figure in a dark coat. He's heading for a car parked in the alley." "Can you get a license number?" "Already got it. And a photo, though the light's terrible." "Should I follow?" "No. If he spots surveillance, we lose any advantage we might have. Let him go and meet me back at the cars." I backed out of the warehouse the way I had entered, leaving Judge Pemberton to his silent vigil. By the time I reached the street, sirens were wailing in the distance, growing louder. Someone had called the police, which meant someone wanted the body found quickly. I drove back to Manhattan with my mind working through the implications. Pemberton had been one of our prime suspects, someone with compelling reasons to want the Barstow papers destroyed. His murder changed everything. It meant we weren't dealing with a desperate judge trying to protect his reputation. We were facing someone who killed to eliminate risks and witnesses. The brownstone looked peaceful when I arrived, but Fred Durkin was waiting on the steps with an expression that suggested peace was an illusion. "Archie, we had excitement while you were gone," he said as I approached. "Someone tried the basement window about an hour ago. Professional job, good tools, knew what they were doing. I scared them off, but they got away clean." "Description?" "Average height, dark clothes, moved like they'd done this before. Could have been male or female. Couldn't tell in the dark. They were gone before I could get close." I found Wolfe in the office, reading as if the world outside hadn't just produced a corpse and an attempted break-in. He looked up when I entered, his eyes sharp with attention. "Well?" "Judge Pemberton is dead. Executed, professional work, single shot to the head. Saul saw someone leaving the scene and got a license plate, and while we were gone, someone tried to break into our basement." Wolfe set down his book with deliberate precision. "Pemberton, that alters the landscape considerably. The judge was a potential threat to someone, but also a potential ally. His removal suggests he was either about to cooperate with authorities or had become unreliable. Or maybe he hired the killer and got eliminated to prevent him from talking afterward." "Unlikely. Professional assassins rarely murder their employers before payment, and the payment usually occurs after successful completion of the contract. No, this suggests a third party. Someone who feared Pemberton's exposure as much as Pemberton himself did." I moved to the desk where the Barstow documents still lay. "So we're looking for someone connected to Pemberton, but not named in these papers. Someone with enough power to order a hit and enough intelligence to cover their tracks." "The police will investigate Pemberton's death," Wolfe said. "They will discover his connection to the Barstow case eventually, particularly if Mr. Kessler's role becomes known. We must move quickly to identify the killer before they eliminate additional witnesses." "What about the license plate Saul got?" "Give me the number. I will have Lon Cohen trace it through his newspaper contacts. In the meantime, bring Mr. Kessler down. He needs to understand that his situation has deteriorated significantly." I climbed to the south room where Kessler sat in the armchair, staring at the wall with the expression of a man contemplating his own mortality. When I told him about Pemberton's death, the color drained from his face. "Pemberton? But he was one of the people in the files. I thought he might be the one threatening me." "He's not threatening anyone anymore," I said. "Which means someone else is cleaning house, eliminating anyone who might expose their secrets. You're on that list, Kessler." We returned to the office, where Wolfe regarded our client with a mixture of sympathy and calculation. "Mr. Kessler, Judge Pemberton's murder confirms that we are dealing with someone willing to kill to protect their interests. You are a liability to them, as was Pemberton. We must identify this person before they complete their house cleaning." But who? Who else could be involved? That, Wolfe said, is what we must determine. The documents you brought us name specific individuals, but they may not name the person who ultimately controls them. Tomorrow, Archie will begin interviewing the remaining suspects. We will shake the tree and see what falls. As I prepared to escort Kessler back upstairs, my phone buzzed. It was Saul with news about the license plate. "Rental car," he reported. "Fake name, cash payment, but the agent remembered something distinctive about the renter, a crescent-shaped scar on his left hand." I stopped walking. "A crescent scar? Ring a bell." I was already moving toward the desk and the Barstow files. "Simon Trace," I said, flipping through the documents. "One of the stock manipulation partners. His description mentions a distinctive scar from a boating accident." "So Trace rented the car," Saul said. "Does that make him our killer?" "Maybe. Or maybe he hired the killer. Either way, Simon Trace just became our primary suspect." I relayed the information to Wolfe, who received it with a grunt of satisfaction. "Excellent. Mr. Trace has revealed himself through carelessness. Tomorrow we will discover whether he is our killer or merely another pawn in someone else's game." The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was growing more dangerous by the hour. We had a dead judge, a terrified lawyer, and a financial consultant who used fake identities to visit murder scenes. The game had moved beyond blackmail and threats into the realm of systematic elimination. It was going to be a very long night. Sleep came in fragments that night, interrupted by mental replays of Judge Pemberton's execution and the growing certainty that Martin Kessler's problems had escalated beyond simple blackmail into systematic elimination. By 6, I was awake for good, and by 7 I was in the kitchen with Fritz, who took one look at my face and wordlessly prepared coffee strong enough to wake the recently deceased. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at 11 with the measured precision of a man who had spent 2 hours among his orchids organizing his thoughts. He settled behind his desk, opened his first beer of the day, and regarded me with the focused attention of a general preparing for battle. "Status report," he said simply. "Simon Trace isn't answering his phones. His office says he called in sick with a migraine, which is either genuine or the kind of excuse a man uses when he spent the night watching judges get murdered. Saul checked his apartment building this morning. No movement, but his car isn't in the garage." "He's either fleeing or hiding," Wolfe observed. "Both reactions suggest involvement, though not necessarily guilt. What of our other suspects?" I consulted my notes. "Gerald Hastings is at his office, presumably preparing for his big stock offering. Marcus Webb is at his hedge fund. Patricia Donovan is in meetings all day. Everyone else seems to be conducting business as usual, except for Pemberton, who's conducting no business at all." "We must flush Mr. Trace from cover," Wolfe decided. "He possesses information we require, and his continued absence suggests he may possess more than information. Call his office. Leave a message stating that we have recovered certain documents from Judge Pemberton's personal effects and wish to discuss their contents. Mention the crescent scar specifically. That's like poking a rattlesnake with a short stick." Indeed. If Mr. Trace is guilty, he will panic and reveal himself. If he is merely terrified, he will be compelled to discover what evidence might exist against him. Either response serves our purpose. I made the call, leaving a message with Trace's secretary that was professionally worded but unmistakably threatening. Then we waited, Wolfe reading while I handled correspondence and tried not to think about how quickly this case was spiraling toward violence. The phone rang at 1:15. I answered with my standard greeting and heard a voice that was trying very hard to sound controlled. "Mr. Goodwin, this is Simon Trace. I received your message about documents. I don't know what you think you found, but I want to make something clear. I had nothing to do with Harold Pemberton's death." "That's reassuring to hear, Mr. Trace. Perhaps you'd like to explain the rental car that was seen leaving the warehouse where Judge Pemberton died." The silence stretched long enough for me to count heartbeats. When Trace spoke again, the careful control was cracking around the edges. "I didn't kill him. I went there because he called me. Said he was in trouble. When I arrived, he was already dead. I panicked and left." "Why the rental car?" "My car is in the shop. Look, I can explain everything, but I need to see Mr. Wolfe. There are things about this situation you don't understand. Come to the office." "I can't. I think I'm being watched. There was a car outside my apartment this morning and it followed me when I left. If I come to you now, I might be leading them directly to your door." I looked at Wolfe, who had been listening on the extension. He nodded once, a gesture that conveyed both permission and warning. "Where are you now?" I asked. "A diner on East 57th Street. The Landmark. I've been here for 2 hours, trying to decide what to do." "Stay there, order lunch, and try to look like a man with nothing more pressing than the daily special on his mind. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. He claims someone's watching him, says he found Pemberton dead and ran. "Go collect him, Archie. If he is being surveilled, we need to know by whom. And if his story is genuine, he may possess information that will identify our killer." The Landmark Diner was one of those establishments that had been serving the same menu since the Truman administration, populated by people who valued consistency over innovation. I found Simon Trace in a back booth, hunched over a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. He was a lean man in his early 50s with graying hair and nervous eyes that kept flicking toward the windows. The crescent scar on his left hand was clearly visible as he gripped the cup. "Mr. Trace," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "You look like a man who's had better days." "You have no idea," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the diner's ambient noise. "Pemberton called me yesterday afternoon. He was terrified. Said someone knew about the Barstow papers and was demanding money. He wanted to meet at that warehouse to discuss terms." "Terms with whom?" "He wouldn't say over the phone. Just said to bring cash and come alone. I tried to talk him out of it, told him we should go to the police together, but he was beyond reason. So I went there to try to talk sense into him. And instead you found a corpse." Trace shuddered visibly. He was tied to a chair with a bullet hole in his forehead. There was blood everywhere. I took one look and ran like a coward. "Did you see anyone else? Any other cars, any movement in the area?" "Nothing. The place was dead quiet except for traffic on the expressway. I got out of there as fast as I could and spent the night in a hotel trying to figure out what to do next." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. Fear was written clearly in every line, but fear could be genuine even in a guilty man. "Tell me about the Barstow papers," I said. "What exactly did you and the judge and the others do that was worth killing for?" Trace glanced around nervously, then leaned forward. "It was a stock manipulation scheme, 20 years ago. 4 of us working together to drive up the price of a small tech company, then dump our shares before the bubble burst. Charles Barstow documented everything, kept records of every meeting, every transaction, every communication. Why would Barstow keep evidence of his own crimes?" "Insurance," Trace said bitterly. Charles was paranoid about his partners. He wanted leverage in case anyone tried to betray him or cut him out of future deals. The papers were his guarantee that we'd all sink together if anyone got greedy. But someone did get greedy. His business partner killed him for an entirely different reason, some embezzlement scheme that had nothing to do with our stock deal. But when Charles died, those papers became a time bomb. If they surfaced during the murder investigation, we'd all be ruined. So the papers disappeared. Someone made them disappear. I assumed it was Charles' lawyer or his executor doing the decent thing. I never knew until recently that copies existed." "When did you learn about Martin Kessler?" Trace's face went pale. 2 weeks ago. I got a call from Marcus Webb. He said someone had contacted him claiming to have copies of the Barstow documents. The caller identified himself as a lawyer named Kessler and suggested a meeting to discuss mutual interests. What did Webb want you to do? He wanted all of us to pool resources and buy Kessler's silence, said it would be cheaper than letting our careers be destroyed by 20-year-old mistakes. And what did you think of that plan? I thought it was dangerous. Blackmailers never stop at one payment. But Marcus was insistent. He said he'd handle the negotiations himself. A cold certainty was settling in my stomach. When did Webb say he was going to contact Kessler? Last week. He was supposed to arrange a meeting, feel out what Kessler wanted, maybe negotiate a reasonable price for permanent silence. And then Judge Pemberton started getting threatening calls. Harold panicked, Trace said. He called me 3 days ago, said someone was threatening to expose him unless he cooperated. He thought it was Kessler, but the voice was disguised and the demands were vague. Just instructions to wait for further contact. I felt the pieces clicking into place with the inevitability of a well-made lock. Marcus Webb contacted Kessler all right, but not to negotiate. He decided elimination was cheaper than blackmail. Trace stared at me with dawning horror. You think Marcus killed Pemberton? I think Marcus Webb is cleaning house, I said. Pemberton was a weak link, someone who might crack under pressure and expose everyone. Kessler has the documents that could destroy you all. Webb's solution is to eliminate the threats permanently. But Marcus isn't a killer. He's a hedge fund manager. The distinction is sometimes academic, I replied, borrowing Wolfe's phrase. Both professions involve the ruthless elimination of liabilities. I stood up, dropping money on the table for the coffee. We're leaving, Mr. Trace. Mr. Wolfe wants to hear your story in person, and you'll be safer in his office than sitting here like a target in a shooting gallery. As we walked to my car, I kept checking the street for surveillance. If Webb was as systematic as I suspected, he would have Trace under observation, waiting for the right moment to complete his house cleaning. The question was whether we could get to Webb before he got to us. The ride back to the brownstone was tense but uneventful. Trace sat hunched in the passenger seat, looking like a man who had finally grasped the full extent of his danger. When we arrived, I hustled him inside quickly, not wanting to give any watchers a clear view of our guest. Wolfe was waiting in the office, his expression conveying the focused attention of a predator who had finally identified his prey. He gestured Trace to the red leather chair and regarded him with calm intensity. Mr. Trace, you have been remarkably foolish, but your foolishness may yet serve justice. Tell me about Marcus Webb. Marcus is ambitious, ruthless when it comes to business, but I never thought he was capable of murder. Ambition and ruthlessness are often the only ingredients murder requires, Wolfe observed. When did Mr. Webb first learn of Mr. Kessler's existence? 2 weeks ago, when Kessler contacted him directly. Marcus called an emergency meeting of the surviving partners. Said we needed to handle this quickly before it got out of control. And his proposed solution? Buy Kessler's silence, whatever the cost. He said he'd handle the negotiations personally. Wolfe's fingers drummed once on the arm of his chair, a sure sign that his mind was working at high speed. Mr. Webb decided that permanent silence was preferable to ongoing blackmail. He contacted Judge Pemberton, arranged the warehouse meeting, and eliminated him as a potential witness. Now he will attempt to eliminate Mr. Kessler and anyone else who might expose his crimes. Including me, Trace said quietly. Indeed. You are now under my protection, Mr. Trace. You will remain in this house until Mr. Webb is apprehended. Archie will take a complete statement from you, documenting every detail of your association with Webb and the original stock manipulation. As I prepared to take Trace's statement, my mind was already working ahead to our next moves. Webb had revealed himself through his actions, but proving his guilt would require more than Trace's testimony. We needed evidence, and we needed to move fast before Webb completed his elimination campaign. The circle was tightening around Marcus Webb, but cornered predators are at their most dangerous. The game was entering its final phase, and the stakes had never been higher. I spent 2 hours taking Simon Trace's statement, documenting every detail of the stock manipulation scheme and Webb's recent behavior. Trace was thorough once he started talking, describing Webb as brilliant but increasingly obsessed with control. A man who viewed problems as obstacles to be eliminated rather than challenges to be managed. When Kessler's blackmail threat emerged, Webb had moved immediately to neutralize it, treating human lives with the same cold calculation he applied to failing investments. By 4 o'clock, I had everything documented and witnessed. Wolfe read through the statement with the concentration of a jeweler examining a diamond for flaws, then set it aside with a grunt of satisfaction. "Mr. Trace, you have been cooperative and forthcoming. That may mitigate your legal difficulties when this matter reaches its conclusion. For now, you will remain upstairs under Fritz's supervision. Do not use the telephone, do not approach the windows, and do not attempt to contact anyone outside this house." After Trace was escorted to the north room, Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, a sure sign that his brain was working through the final permutations of the case. "We have motive, opportunity, and witness testimony," I said, "but we don't have proof that Webb killed Pemberton. Trace's statement establishes Webb's intent and his access to information, but it doesn't put him at the warehouse with a gun." "Indeed," Wolfe murmured without opening his eyes. "We require either physical evidence or a confession. Since physical evidence is in the possession of the police and beyond our reach, we must arrange for Mr. Webb to incriminate himself." "How do you propose we do that? Ask him politely to admit murder." Wolfe's eyes opened, and there was something in them that reminded me why criminals feared him more than they feared the police. "We will create circumstances that compel Mr. Webb to reveal himself. He believes he has successfully eliminated Judge Pemberton, that Mr. Trace is either dead or in hiding. He does not know that we have secured both Mr. Trace and Mr. Kessler. We will exploit that ignorance. You want to bring him here? I want him to come here believing he can resolve his problem with minimal risk. Call him. Inform him that we represent Mr. Kessler in a delicate matter involving certain historical documents. Suggest that discretion and financial accommodation might resolve the situation to everyone's satisfaction." I made the call. Marcus Webb's secretary put me through immediately when I mentioned Nero Wolfe's name. Webb's voice was smooth, confident, the voice of a man accustomed to controlling outcomes. "Mr. Goodwin, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Mr. Wolfe has been retained by Martin Kessler regarding certain documents that have come into his possession. Documents that concern a stock manipulation scheme from 20 years ago. Mr. Kessler understands that you and several associates might prefer these papers remain private." There was a pause, brief but telling. "I see. Is Mr. Kessler available for discussion?" "Mr. Kessler is at a secure location. Mr. Wolfe has the documents and authorization to negotiate on his behalf. He suggests a meeting at his office this evening at 9 o'clock to discuss terms." "Terms?" "For the permanent retirement of these papers and Mr. Kessler's continued discretion. Mr. Wolfe believes a mutually beneficial arrangement can be reached." "That sounds reasonable." 9 o'clock, you said. I assume this meeting will be private. Just you, Mr. Wolfe, and myself. We can resolve this matter quietly. Excellent. I'll be there. When I hung up, Wolfe nodded with satisfaction. He agreed too readily. A man in his position would typically demand more details, perhaps involve counsel. His immediate acquiescence suggests he has already formulated a plan that does not involve financial negotiation. "He's coming to clean house," I said. "He thinks he can eliminate the threat at its source." "Precisely. Call Inspector Kramer. Tell him I can deliver Judge Pemberton's murderer tonight, provided he arrives with sufficient men and remains out of sight until I call for him. He may wait in the kitchen with Fritz." That conversation was predictably explosive. Kramer's voice rose to a pitch that could shatter glass when I explained that we had been withholding information about a murder case. But when I mentioned that we could deliver the killer with evidence and confession, his tone shifted from outrage to professional interest. "If this is another of Wolfe's theatrical productions," he warned, "I'll arrest everyone in the building and sort it out downtown." "It's not theater, Inspector. It's justice. Be here at 8:30 and bring your handcuffs." The next few hours were spent in careful preparation. Saul Panzer arrived at 8 and took position in the front room, invisible in the shadows, but ready to move if needed. Fred Durkin covered the back entrance from the kitchen. Kramer arrived at 8:30 with Sergeant Stebbins and 2 other detectives, all of whom looked skeptical about spending their evening in a private residence, waiting for a confession. "This better be good, Wolfe," Kramer muttered as I showed them to the kitchen. "I've got real cases to work." "You will have a solved case before the evening is over," Wolfe assured him. "Please remain quiet until I call for you. Mr. Webb must believe he's in control until the moment we demonstrate otherwise." At 5 minutes to 9, I positioned myself near the front door. Kessler and Trace were upstairs, safely out of sight, but ready to be called as witnesses. The brownstone felt like a theater before the curtain rises, every element carefully positioned for the performance to come. The doorbell rang at 9 o'clock precisely. I opened the door to find Marcus Webb standing on the stoop, looking every inch the successful hedge fund manager in a tailored overcoat and silk scarf. He carried a leather briefcase and wore an expression of polite inquiry that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Goodwin, I believe I'm expected." "Right on time, Mr. Webb. Mr. Wolfe appreciates punctuality." I led him to the office, noting the way his eyes swept the room, cataloging exits and potential threats. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed he controlled the situation, unaware that he was walking into a carefully constructed trap. "Mr. Wolfe," Webb said, settling into the red leather chair. "An honor to meet you, though I wish the circumstances were more pleasant." "Pleasant circumstances rarely require my services," Wolfe replied. "You are here to discuss the Barstow documents and their disposition." Webb placed his briefcase on the floor beside his chair, his hand resting casually on the handle. "I'm here to resolve an unfortunate misunderstanding. Mr. Kessler has apparently come into possession of certain papers that could cause embarrassment to several people. I'm prepared to offer substantial compensation for their return and his discretion." "How substantial?" $500,000. Cash. Surely that's preferable to the uncertainty and legal complications of public exposure. Wolfe studied Webb with the intensity of a naturalist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "You speak of embarrassment, Mr. Webb, but Judge Pemberton's death suggests the stakes are considerably higher than mere embarrassment." For the first time, Webb's composure flickered. "The judge's death was a tragedy, a random crime, I understand. The city has become dangerous." "Indeed," Wolfe said softly, "particularly for those who possess inconvenient knowledge." The trap was set, the players in position. Now came the moment when Marcus Webb would learn that his careful plans had been anticipated, his secrets exposed, and his control nothing more than an illusion. The game was about to reach its climax, and I could feel the tension in the room like electricity before a storm. Webb's fingers drummed once against his briefcase handle, a nervous gesture that betrayed the careful composure he was trying to maintain. His eyes had gone calculating, the look of a man reassessing odds that were no longer in his favor. "I'm afraid you've been misinformed about Judge Pemberton's death," Webb said, his voice steady but lacking its earlier confidence. "Whatever Mr. Trace may have told you is the product of a frightened imagination. The man has been unstable for months. Mr. Trace observed your rental car leaving the warehouse where Judge Pemberton died," Wolfe replied with devastating calm. "He noted the license plate, which we traced to a vehicle rented under a false name but paid for with a credit card linked to one of your shell companies. The rental agent remembered you specifically because of the crescent-shaped scar on your left hand, the same scar Mr. Trace described when he identified you as his former business partner." Webb's right hand moved involuntarily toward his lap, hiding the distinctive mark. Circumstantial evidence. Anyone could have used that card. Perhaps, Wolfe conceded. But when combined with the telephone records showing 3 calls from your office to Judge Pemberton yesterday afternoon and Mr. Trace's testimony that Pemberton mentioned your name specifically when he called in panic, the circumstantial becomes compelling. You arranged that meeting, Mr. Webb. You lured Judge Pemberton to his death. The color was draining from Webb's face now, his careful mask slipping to reveal something desperate underneath. You can't prove I killed him. Being at the scene doesn't make me a murderer. No, Wolfe agreed, but your motive does. Judge Pemberton was the weakest link in your conspiracy, a man whose nerve was failing and whose federal appointment would have triggered the kind of background investigation that would have uncovered the Barstow papers. You decided elimination was preferable to the risk of exposure. Webb stood abruptly, lifting his briefcase with him. The movement was too quick, too controlled, and I saw his hand shift to grip the handle differently. This conversation is over, Webb said. I came here to negotiate in good faith, but you've chosen to make wild accusations instead. I'm leaving. I think not, Wolfe said softly. You came here armed, Mr. Webb. The briefcase contains a weapon, not negotiating materials. You intended to eliminate Mr. Kessler, myself, and Mr. Goodwin, then arrange the scene to suggest criminal violence. It was a reasonable plan, except for one flaw. Webb's hand froze on the briefcase latch. What flaw? You assumed you were the only one prepared for violence. I drew my gun smoothly, keeping it trained on Webb's center mass while stepping to block his path to the door. At the same moment, Saul Panzer materialized from the shadows near the front room entrance, his own weapon visible in his hand. Webb's eyes darted between us, calculating distances and angles. For a moment I thought he might try it anyway, desperation overriding logic. Then his shoulders sagged and he set the briefcase down carefully. This is entrapment, he said weakly. You lured me here under false pretenses. We invited you to discuss business, Wolfe corrected. You chose to attend with murderous intent. That decision was entirely your own. Inspector Kramer, please join us. The office door opened to admit Kramer and 3 detectives, all with weapons drawn. Stebbins moved immediately to secure Webb's briefcase, opening it to reveal a compact pistol nestled among papers and cash. Marcus Webb, Kramer announced with evident satisfaction, you're under arrest for the murder of Judge Harold Pemberton. You have the right to remain silent, and given the hole you've dug for yourself, I'd recommend using it. As they cuffed Webb and prepared to escort him out, he looked back at Wolfe with something approaching grudging respect. You orchestrated this entire evening, he said. The phone call, the meeting, even having the police waiting, it was all planned. Justice requires planning, Mr. Webb, Wolfe replied. You planned Judge Pemberton's murder with the same methodical approach you brought to stock manipulation. The difference is that my planning serves justice, while yours served only greed and self-preservation. After Webb was removed and the police had departed with their evidence, I brought Kessler and Trace downstairs to inform them of their changed circumstances. Both men looked exhausted but relieved, like survivors of a shipwreck finally reaching shore. What happens now? Kessler asked quietly. You will cooperate fully with the authorities, Wolfe told him. Your testimony, combined with Mr. Trace's and the physical evidence, will ensure Mr. Webb's conviction. In exchange for your cooperation, you will likely face probation rather than prison time. And the Barstow papers? Will be entered into evidence and eventually sealed. The secrets they contain will remain buried, as they should be. After our guests departed under police escort, the brownstone settled back into its familiar quiet. Wolfe sat with a fresh beer, looking satisfied in the way he did when intellectual combat had ended in victory. Webb made the classic error, he observed. He confused ruthlessness with intelligence. True intelligence recognizes that some problems cannot be solved by elimination, only by accommodation with justice. He came close to succeeding, I pointed out. If he'd been a little more careful, a little less arrogant, then he would not have been Marcus Webb, Wolfe replied. Arrogance was essential to his character, as necessary to his downfall as greed was to his crimes. Men like Webb believe they can calculate their way out of any situation. They fail to understand that some equations have only one solution: justice. Fritz appeared in the doorway to announce dinner, and as we prepared to leave the office, I reflected that another midnight call had been answered, another threat neutralized, and another demonstration given that in the eternal contest between intelligence and evil, intelligence, properly applied, would always prevail. The brownstone had returned to its natural state of ordered calm, ready for whatever disruption tomorrow might bring. The departure of Inspector Kramer and his squad left the brownstone in that particular state of suspended quiet that follows the resolution of violence. Fritz appeared almost immediately with a dust cloth and the expression of righteous indignation he reserved for occasions when strangers had disturbed his perfectly ordered domain. He moved through the office with methodical precision, erasing fingerprints from the woodwork and restoring the furniture to its proper alignment, as if the physical act of cleaning could erase the memory of handcuffs and drawn weapons. Wolfe had gone directly to the dining room, his priorities having reset the moment Marcus Webb was led away in custody. Dinner was the promised squab with herbs, which had survived the evening's unpleasantness beautifully. We ate in the customary silence, the only sounds the gentle clink of silverware and the distant hum of traffic on 35th Street. It wasn't until we returned to the office with coffee for me and beer for him that the spell of normalcy was finally broken. Marcus Webb was intelligent, but not wise, Wolfe began, settling into his chair with a satisfied grunt. Intelligence allows a man to solve problems efficiently. Wisdom teaches him which problems should not be solved through elimination. Webb possessed the former quality in abundance, but lacked the latter entirely. He treated people like variables in an equation, I said. Pemberton became a liability, so he eliminated him. Kessler had dangerous knowledge, so he planned to eliminate him too. Even Trace would have been next on the list eventually. Precisely. And in choosing that solution, Webb guaranteed his own destruction. Had he accepted exposure and faced the legal consequences of his stock manipulation, he would have paid fines, perhaps served minimal prison time, and emerged to rebuild his career. Instead, he murdered a federal judge and attempted to murder 3 more people. He traded embarrassment for life imprisonment. The phone rang at 9:40. I answered to find Inspector Kramer on the line, his voice carrying the particular mixture of satisfaction and irritation that meant he had paperwork to complete. "Webb's talking," Kramer reported without preamble. Gave us a full confession once his lawyer explained how much evidence we had stacked against him. The rental car, the telephone records, Trace's testimony, the weapon in his briefcase. He's looking at murder 1 for Pemberton, plus attempted murder charges for tonight's performance. "Satisfactory," Wolfe said when I relayed the information. Mr. Webb chose confession over the uncertainty of trial. A pragmatic decision, given the circumstances. 20 minutes later, Kramer himself appeared at our door, looking like a man who had solved a major case but wasn't entirely sure how it had happened. He settled into the red leather chair without invitation and fixed Wolfe with a stare that demanded explanations. "What I want to know," he said, "is how you knew Webb would come here armed and ready to kill. That was one hell of a risk you took, baiting a murderer into your office." "Mr. Webb's character dictated his actions," Wolfe replied calmly. "A man who murders to protect secrets will not hesitate to murder again when opportunity presents itself. His immediate agreement to our meeting was too eager, too confident. He saw it as a chance to resolve all his problems permanently. And instead he walked into a trap. He walked into justice, Inspector. The trap was merely the mechanism of delivery. Kramer shook his head with the weary acceptance of a man who had long since stopped trying to fully understand Nero Wolfe's methods. Next time you're planning to catch a killer in your office, I'd appreciate more than an hour's notice. I don't like surprises, especially the kind that involve firearms. I shall endeavor to provide adequate warning in future, Wolfe promised with perfect gravity. After Kramer departed, the brownstone settled into its familiar evening rhythm. The case was closed, the client's life preserved, and our fee secured. Another midnight disruption had been resolved, another threat neutralized, and the sanctity of Wolfe's routine restored. I returned to my desk and the correspondence that had accumulated during our brief but intense adventure. The book I'd been reading when Kessler's phantom call interrupted my evening 3 nights ago still waited on the side table, bookmark protruding like an accusation. Somehow, after homicidal hedge fund managers and resurrected scandals, fictional murder had lost some of its appeal. "You know," I said, looking up from the invoices, "when that phone rang at midnight, I figured we were in for a simple blackmail case. Maybe some shouting, a few threats, certainly no corpses in Queen's warehouses." "You misjudged the stakes," Wolfe observed mildly, not looking up from his book. "It happens to the best of us." "Thanks for the consolation. I'll have that carved on my tombstone if Marcus Webb ever makes parole." "He will not," Wolfe said with finality. "Men like Webb are proficient at climbing but incompetent at falling. They believe they can negotiate with gravity itself." The brownstone had returned to its natural state of ordered calm, ready for whatever disruption tomorrow might bring. Outside, the city continued its restless motion, but here in the office, surrounded by familiar books and comfortable silence, peace had been restored to our small corner of the world. The following morning brought the kind of crisp November sunshine that makes Manhattan look like it's been washed and polished overnight. I came downstairs at 8 to find Fritz humming in the kitchen, a sure sign that the brownstone had returned to its natural state of ordered calm. The coffee was excellent, the morning papers were full of Marcus Webb's confession, and the phone on my desk sat silent and innocent, as if it had never delivered a midnight threat. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at 11 with an orchid catalogue and the satisfied expression of a man who had successfully defended his territory. He settled behind his desk, opened his morning beer, and began examining photographs of exotic blooms with the concentration most people reserve for stock reports. "Inspector Kramer telephoned earlier," he announced without looking up. "Mr. Webb has provided a complete confession in exchange for a life sentence without parole. The Barstow papers will be sealed by court order, their secrets buried with appropriate ceremony. Mr. Trace will testify and receive immunity. The dead will keep their secrets, and the living will escape with their reputations intact." The doorbell rang at 11:30. I answered it to find Martin Kessler on the stoop, looking considerably more human than the terrified man who had stumbled into our office 3 days ago. The haunted expression was gone, replaced by something approaching peace. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I wanted to thank Mr. Wolfe personally before I leave the city. My attorney says the charges against me will be minimal." I showed him to the office, where Wolfe regarded him with the mild interest he reserved for clients whose cases had concluded satisfactorily. "Mr. Kessler, I trust you have learned something from this experience." "I've learned that keeping dangerous secrets is like hoarding dynamite," Kessler replied. "Eventually, someone strikes a match." "An apt metaphor," Wolfe acknowledged. "You possessed power without wisdom, ammunition without understanding that ammunition eventually explodes. The Barstow papers represented 20 years of accumulated poison. You kept them not for justice, as you told yourself, but because you feared the consequences of action more than the risks of inaction." Kessler nodded slowly. "I'll be destroying the remaining copies today. All of them. The world doesn't need those secrets anymore." "A wise decision, belatedly arrived at," Wolfe said. "Your fee has been paid, your life preserved, and your legal difficulties minimized. Use this second chance more intelligently than you used the first." After Kessler departed, I filed the case documents and prepared the final invoice. Another midnight call answered, another client saved from his own foolishness, another demonstration that secrets, like wine, don't always improve with age. The afternoon passed in comfortable routine. Wolfe read his catalogues, I handled correspondence, and Fritz prepared dinner with the enthusiasm of a man whose kitchen had been restored to his exclusive control. By evening, the case had been reduced to a file folder and a memory of how quickly blackmail escalates into murder. That night after dinner, I returned to the book I'd been reading when Kessler's phantom call had shattered our peace. The butler was still indistinguishable from the murderer, but somehow fictional crime seemed less compelling after dealing with the real thing. Real murder, I'd learned again, was messier and more complicated than any novelist dared imagine. Wolfe sat across from me with his own book, probably another biography of some Roman emperor who had also dealt with ambitious men who confused ruthlessness with wisdom. The brownstone was silent except for the turning of pages and the distant sounds of the city beyond our walls. I glanced at the telephone, dark and quiet now, looking as innocent as a sleeping cat. It was hard to believe that 4 nights ago it had been the conduit for threats and terror, the instrument that had set our entire adventure in motion. Tomorrow it might ring again with news of fresh disasters, but tonight it belonged to us. The brownstone had returned to its natural state, ready for whatever disruption the future might bring. The phantom call had been answered, the midnight threat resolved, and order restored to our small corner of the world. It was, I reflected, exactly as it should be. The check from Martin Kessler arrived by messenger at 2 o'clock the following afternoon, a certified bank draft that looked as beautiful as a black Vanda orchid in full bloom. I deposited it immediately, enjoying the crisp sound of the paper sliding into the safe, a sound that always signaled the definitive end of a case. With the fee secured and the expense report reconciled, the disruptions of the past 3 days began to recede, leaving the office in that peculiar state of quiet that feels less like peace and more like a held breath. Wolfe was at his desk, engaged in a staring contest with a bottle of beer. He appeared to be winning. The maps and diagrams of the warehouse district had been cleared away, replaced by the galley proofs of a new book on hybridized plants that he had been threatening to read for a month. The violent reality of Marcus Webb and the tragic end of Judge Pemberton seemed very far away, banished by the thick walls of the brownstone and the rigid schedule that ruled life within them. I sat at my own desk, swiveling my chair to look at the instrument that had started it all. The telephone sat black and silent on the wood, looking innocent enough, but I couldn't shake the memory of that midnight ring. "You know," I said, breaking the silence that had stretched for 20 minutes, "I've been thinking about Kessler. He hoarded that poison for 3 years, and now he walks away clean, probably to write a memoir about his harrowing ordeal. Webb goes to prison for life, Pemberton is dead, and Kessler goes back to his practice with a good story. It doesn't seem entirely balanced." Wolfe poured beer into his glass, watching the foam rise with critical attention. "You are confusing law with justice, and justice with satisfaction. Mr. Kessler did not escape unscathed. He lived for weeks in absolute terror, a prisoner of his own greed and indecision. He has lost his anonymity, his peace of mind, and the leverage he foolishly thought would secure his future. He is a man who held a grenade thinking it was a gold nugget, and he is fortunate to have lost only his dignity when the pin was pulled." "I suppose you're right," I admitted. "It's just that for a case that started with a ghost story, the ending feels very practical. No spectral retribution, just a check in the safe and a confession in the district attorney's inbox." "That is the nature of our profession," Wolfe said, taking a long swallow. "We begin with melodrama and end with paperwork. The phantom call was never a supernatural event. It was merely the sound of consequences arriving, however belatedly. Mr. Webb believed he could silence the past by eliminating the voices that spoke of it. He failed to understand that the truth does not require a voice to be heard. It requires only time. He picked up his book, signaling that the post-mortem was concluded. The case was filed, the fee was banked, and the moral equations had been balanced to his satisfaction. The brownstone had absorbed the disruption and returned to its equilibrium, impervious to the chaos of the city outside. I turned back to my own work, checking the schedule for tomorrow. The orchid show was coming up, and there were letters to dictate and supplies to order. The routine was closing in around us, comfortable and familiar as an old coat. Then the phone rang. It was a sharp, demanding sound in the quiet room. I looked at the clock. It was not midnight, but the sun had gone down, and the shadows were lengthening in the corners of the office. For a second, neither of us moved. The sound hung in the air, a question waiting for an answer, a reminder that the world outside was still there, full of people with secrets they couldn't keep and problems they couldn't solve. Wolfe sighed, a sound of profound resignation, and lowered his book. "Well, Archie," he rumbled, "the apparatus demands attention." I picked up the receiver, ready for whatever phantom, fool, or client was waiting on the other end. "Nero Wolfe's residence, Archie Goodwin speaking," I said. And just like that, the next chapter began.